Gabriel ran a soft flannel cloth over the spine of a leather-bound book. This was his refuge, the rare book section at the back of the bookstore, a small sanctuary his mother had set up years before. The smell of old paper and dust was the scent of his childhood. Today, that scent was mixed with a denser melancholy. It had been exactly 1 year since she had passed away, leaving him not only with the pain of her absence, but also with the weight of keeping her dream alive. Living pages. Bookstore was all that was left, and he felt he was failing to protect it. I know today is a difficult day, my son, but the numbers don't wait for grief to pass. Eduardo's voice, his stepfather's, was always calm, measured, which made it even more cutting. He approached, impeccably dressed in a button-down shirt, holding a leather folder. Eduardo was an accountant and, since the death of Gabriel's mother, had taken over the store's finances, a gesture everyone had praised as an act of generosity. He opened the folder on the counter, revealing a spreadsheet full of red cells. Look at this. July's sales, a disaster. Worse than June. Gabriel looked at the numbers, feeling a knot form in his stomach. He didn't understand spreadsheets and balance sheets, but the red screamed failure. But July was good. We had the poetry event, the new window display. The store was full, he argued, his voice low. Eduardo sighed, the sigh of a patient adult explaining the world to a child. Foot traffic isn't profit, Gabriel. People come in, browse, have a coffee, and leave. Your mother had a special way of turning browsers into buyers. It's a talent that can't be inherited, unfortunately. The comparison to his mother was Eduardo's most effective weapon. Gabriel flinched, feeling small and incompetent. I'm doing my best, he whispered. I know you are, and I admire your effort, Eduardo said, placing a fatherly hand on his shoulder. That's why I scheduled a meeting for this afternoon, with an investor, a man who can help us get out of this hole, maybe modernize things. It's our only chance. Do it for her memory. The request, wrapped in an emotional appeal, sounded more like a summons. Gabriel just nodded, defeated. After Eduardo left for his office downtown, Gabriel tried to work, but the feeling of helplessness paralyzed him. He looked at the customers coming in and could only see the profit that wasn't happening. He looked at the books and only saw stagnant inventory. The joy of being there, in the place he loved most in the world, had been eroded by anxiety. The door opened, and the little bell chimed, announcing the arrival of Helena, a retired history professor, who had been a customer of the store since its opening and a great friend of his mother. Good morning, my dear, she said with a gentle smile that always warmed the room. I made those cinnamon cookies your mother loved. I thought a little sweetness would do you good today. She placed a small jar on the counter. Helena was the only person who seemed to understand the weight of that day beyond the numbers. She didn't talk about sales or investments. She talked about longing, about memories, about the sparkle in his mother's eyes when she found a rare book. Her presence was a relief amidst Gabriel's silent chaos. While they had coffee, Gabriel opened up, something he could only do with her. The store is doing poorly, Helena. Very poorly. Eduardo showed me the reports. We're sinking. Helena frowned, surprised. Poorly? That's strange. I was here on Tuesday and the line at the register was huge because of that classic sale you were running. I bought 3 books myself, and I recommended it to my old book club. I know at least 5 of them came here. Gabriel shrugged, too drained to argue. Sales don't make much profit. That's what Eduardo said. Helena observed him with her sharp eyes. Gabriel, your stepfather is a man of numbers, of spreadsheets. Your mother was a woman of people, of stories. The truth of a bookstore isn't only in the debit and credit columns. Don't let him make you forget that. She then changed the subject, asking about a specific book, but the seed of doubt, however tiny, had been planted in her mind. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a delivery man with a box of books. Gabriel went to check the invoice, but he couldn't find it. Damn, not again, he muttered. It was the 3rd time that month that an important delivery had arrived without an invoice, which complicated inventory control. Eduardo must have forgotten to email it to me again. He said he was going to centralize all the receipts to better organize the finances. Helena heard this with a strange sense of alarm. Centralize or control? He's always been so organized. Strange for him to forget something like that so often. Helena commented casually. It's the stress. He's bending over backwards to help me. Gabriel replied, defending his stepfather out of habit. But inside, he felt the sting of frustration. Every small mistake by Eduardo somehow turned into proof of his own incompetence in managing the store. It was a cycle of dependency that left him increasingly insecure. Helena decided to stay a little longer in the bookstore. Under the pretext of looking for a book, she watched Gabriel, saw him attend to customers with a kindness and knowledge that belied the image of a bad manager. A young man asked for a poetry recommendation, and Gabriel spent 10 minutes talking with him, finding the perfect book. The young man left happy, with 3 books under his arm. Helena smiled. That was the talent Eduardo claimed couldn't be inherited. He just didn't see it, or didn't want to. While Gabriel was busy at the register, Helena approached the desk where his mother used to work, which now served as a makeshift office. There was a pile of papers that Eduardo had left for Gabriel to review. On top, a draft of a new lease agreement with a much higher rent. Beside it, a business card from a luxury real estate agency. Helena felt a chill. Why would a bookstore that was sinking be negotiating a more expensive lease? It made no sense at all. Moved by an impulse, Helena took the real estate agency's card and slipped it into her purse. When Gabriel returned to the counter, she played it cool, asking about the investor who was coming in the afternoon. I don't know much about him. Eduardo said he's an important businessman interested in local businesses with growth potential, Gabriel explained, repeating what his stepfather had told him. The word growth sounded ironic, considering the reports he had seen earlier. Helena felt she had to do more. Gabriel, your mother, she kept the old store ledgers, didn't she? The ones where she wrote everything down by hand, before Eduardo computerized everything. Gabriel thought for a moment. I think so. They must be in the storage room, in a box, somewhere. Why don't you take a look at them, just out of curiosity, to see what sales were like at this same time in previous years? Sometimes looking at the past helps us understand the present, she suggested, as casually as she could manage. Helena's suggestion stuck in Gabriel's mind. After lunch, he went down to the dusty storage room. The place held his mother's scent. He found a cardboard box labeled Balances 2018-2022. Inside were several hardcover notebooks, with her elegant handwriting filling every page. He took the notebook for the previous year and brought it upstairs. He sat at the counter and began to flip through it, comparing her notes with Eduardo's reports. At first, everything seemed confusing, but then he began to notice a pattern. The book sales that Eduardo classified as low profit, like the classics promotions and poetry events, were the ones that in his mother's notebooks brought in the most customer traffic and consequently boosted the sale of other full-priced items. Her strategy wasn't immediate profit on every item, but the creation of a vibrant ecosystem that kept the store healthy. Eduardo wasn't just using a different metric, he was ignoring the very logic that sustained the business. Continuing to flip through, Gabriel found something even stranger. At the end of the previous year's notebook, there was a note from his mother about paying off an old loan she had taken out for the facade renovation. Final payment, free of major debts, she had written, with a small sun drawn next to it. Gabriel froze. In the expense report that Eduardo showed him every month, there was a hefty bank loan installment, which, according to him, his mother had left behind, and which consumed a large part of the revenue. The lie was clear, cold, and documented. The loan didn't exist. Eduardo had been siphoning money from the store every month under the pretext of paying a phantom debt. That's why the numbers never added up. That's why the store was always on the verge of bankruptcy. It wasn't Gabriel's incompetence, it was Eduardo's greed. The revelation felt like a punch. He felt dizzy, a mixture of anger, pain from the betrayal, and a strange, bitter relief that he wasn't the failure he had been led to believe he was. While Gabriel was processing the discovery, Helena, from a cafe across the street, was making a phone call. She had looked up the name on the luxury real estate card and the agent's name. Under the pretext of being a potential investor, she got the information she wanted. The agency specialized in buying old commercial buildings in up-and-coming areas for demolition and new development. They didn't invest in existing businesses. They bought properties. The investor Eduardo was bringing to the meeting wasn't interested in saving the bookstore. He was interested in the land. Eduardo's plan became terribly clear to Helena. He was financially sabotaging the store to force Gabriel, the legal heir, to agree to the sale of the building, probably for a fraction of its real value, while pocketing a hefty commission in the process. It was a cruel and meticulously planned scheme against his own stepson, on the anniversary of the death of the woman they both claimed to love. Helena returned to the bookstore, her face grim. She found Gabriel sitting at the counter, pale, with his mother's notebook open in front of him. Their eyes met, and no words were needed. She knew he had discovered something, and he knew her suspicion was real. The loan, it was a lie, Gabriel said, his voice choked. He's been stealing from us. Helena placed her hand on his. It's worse than that, Gabriel. The investor coming today, he doesn't want the bookstore. He wants the building. Eduardo is trying to make you sell your mother's legacy. The final revelation completed the puzzle. Gabriel's sadness gave way to a cold fury. The pain of losing his mother, which had left him vulnerable, now transformed into a strength to protect what was hers. The meeting is at 4, he said, looking at the clock. They'll be here. What are you going to do? Helena asked. I'm going to receive them, Gabriel replied, closing his mother's notebook with a new and frightening determination. I'm going to let him play out his theater until the very end. At 4 o'clock sharp, Eduardo entered the bookstore, followed by a man in an expensive suit and a predatory smile. Gabriel, this is Mr. Vasconcelos, Eduardo announced, all solicitousness. Mr. Vasconcelos, this is my stepson, Gabriel, who is bravely trying to carry the business forward. The man shook Gabriel's hand, but his eyes scanned the space, measuring the walls, the ceiling, clearly uninterested in the books. Helena was sitting in an armchair in the corner, pretending to read, but attentive to every word. Eduardo began the presentation. He opened his folder and showed the same red spreadsheets. As you can see, the situation is critical. Gabriel is a good boy, but the book retail market is cruel. The store, unfortunately, is no longer viable. He spoke in a grave, mournful tone, as if the death of the store were an inevitability. Gabriel listened in silence, letting him set his own stage. Vasconcelos, the investor, nodded with false compassion. A shame. Such a charming spot. Exactly, Eduardo continued. That's why my proposal, and the one I believe Gabriel's mother would approve of, is to accept your investment offer. An injection of capital to liquidate the inventory honorably and perhaps reallocate the spot for a new venture. It would be a way to turn a loss into an opportunity. The way he used his wife's memory to justify the scheme was the vilest part. He was selling the soul of the place and calling it a business solution. Gabriel remained silent, his face an indecipherable mask. Vasconcelos turned to him. So, young man, your stepfather seems like a very sensible man. The offer I made to him for the property is quite generous considering the circumstances. It would allow you to walk away debt-free and with some capital to start over. It was the checkmate moment. All eyes turned to Gabriel. Helena held her breath. This was the moment he was supposed to break down and agree according to Eduardo's script. Gabriel stood up slowly. He didn't look at Eduardo. He looked directly at Vasconcelos. Generous? It's interesting you speak of generosity. He walked to the counter and picked up his mother's hardcover notebook. He opened it to a specific page. Did you know, for example, that this store has not had a bank loan for over a year? Eduardo turned pale. Gabriel, now is not the time to confuse things with old papers. We're talking about the future. No, we're talking about the truth, Gabriel retorted, his voice firm and loud, echoing through the silent bookstore. And the truth, Mr. Vasconcelos, is that this store is not failing. He turned the notebook towards the investor. These are the real numbers recorded by the founder of this store. Numbers that show a profit that has been mysteriously disappearing for the last 12 months. He then looked at Eduardo, his gaze burning with contempt. A mystery that by chance began exactly when my stepfather took over the finances. The ensuing silence was heavy. Vasconcelos looked from the notebook to Eduardo's spreadsheet, and then to the accountant's ashen face. He was a business shark, but he wasn't stupid. He realized instantly that he had been drawn into a family fraud. What is this boy talking about, Eduardo? He asked, his tone shifting from friendly to icy. Eduardo tried to laugh, a strangled sound. He's shaken. The anniversary of his mother's death. He doesn't know what he's saying. That's when Helena stood up. "Oh, he knows very well what he's saying," she said, her voice calm but full of authority. "And I also know that you, Mr. Vasconcelos, are not an investor. You are a real estate developer. And your interest was never in the bookstore but in this land." She placed the business card she had taken earlier on the counter, the final proof. Vasconcelos looked at the card and then at Eduardo with fury. He had been exposed as an accomplice to a cheap scam. "I don't do business with swindlers," Vasconcelos said, standing up abruptly. "Especially swindlers who use their own family. Good day." He turned and walked out of the bookstore with long strides, leaving Eduardo alone, unmasked in front of his stepson. Eduardo looked at Gabriel, the mask of the Good Samaritan finally fallen, revealing the face of pure greed. You don't know what you've done. You've ruined everything," he hissed. "No," Gabriel replied with a calm he didn't know he possessed. "I saved everything. I saved my mother's dream from you." He pointed to the door. "Get out of my store, and don't ever come back." Eduardo hesitated for a second, as if he might argue, but seeing Gabriel's steely gaze, and Helena's presence as a witness, he just grabbed his folder and left in silence, a defeated man. The moment the door closed, Gabriel felt the weight of an entire year lift from his shoulders. He leaned on the counter, taking a deep breath. Free. Helena came over and put an arm around him. "You were incredible, Gabriel. Your mother would be so proud." Tears finally came to Gabriel's eyes, but this time they were not of sadness or failure. They were of relief, of exhaustion, and of a newfound pride. He was no longer the scared boy living in the shadow of his mother or his stepfather. He was the owner of that bookstore. He was the guardian of his family's legacy. That night, for the first time in a year, the bookstore didn't close on time. Helena helped Gabriel call a trusted lawyer, who advised him on the next steps to audit the accounts and take legal action against Eduardo. Afterwards, they sat in the store's small cafe, drank cheap wine, and reviewed Gabriel's mother's notebooks. Not as business documents, but as the pages of a strong woman's story. A story he now had the responsibility and honor to continue. As he read the notes, Gabriel rediscovered his mother's philosophy. She wrote about customers by name, about the books they loved, about the conversations they had. The bookstore for her was never just about selling products. It was about connecting people and ideas. Eduardo, with his purely financial vision, never understood that. He tried to turn a place with a soul into a lifeless spreadsheet, and he almost succeeded. Gabriel promised himself he would bring the store's soul back. In the days that followed, a transformation began. With the help of Helena and the lawyer, Gabriel took full control of the finances. He fired the accountant Eduardo had appointed and hired a young, recent graduate full of ideas. He delved into his mother's notebooks, reviving the promotions, events, and ideas that had been abandoned. The first thing he did was make a large sign for the window. "In her honor, poetry is back." The news of what had happened spread quietly through the neighborhood, not as gossip but as a legend of resistance. The old customers who had drifted away feeling that the soul of the store had changed began to return. They came to buy, but also to offer support, to share a memory of Gabriel's mother, to say they were happy to see him there, standing firm at his post. The store, which Eduardo claimed was dying, began to throb with more life than ever. Gabriel, in turn, found a new confidence. He was no longer the insecure young man who needed approval. He made decisions, experimented, and even made mistakes. But each mistake was his own. A lesson, not proof of inability. He organized a poetry slam that packed the store on a Tuesday night. At the end, seeing the people applaud, he felt his mother's presence, not as a shadow of comparison, but as a smile of approval. A month later, Gabriel was in the storage room when he found another box. Inside were letters his mother had exchanged with authors and publishers and a personal diary. In one of the last entries, she wrote about Eduardo. "He is a good, practical man, but he doesn't understand the magic. If something happens to me, I hope Gabriel has the strength to protect the magic." The sentence struck him like lightning. His mother knew. She couldn't have predicted the malice, but she knew the fundamental difference between her vision and her husband's. She hadn't left him a burden, but a mission to protect the magic. At that moment, Gabriel understood that everything that had happened was not a detour, but the fulfillment of his purpose. He wasn't just saving a business from bankruptcy, he was defending an ideal, a way of seeing the world that valued stories over just numbers. He closed the diary and went upstairs, feeling more connected to his mother than ever. The bookstore flourished. Gabriel, inspired by his mother's notebooks, created a lost and found book club where members discussed rare and forgotten works. He set up a small stage at the back of the store for readings and live music. He painted a mural on one of the walls that told the story of living pages, from the first shelf to the present day. He wasn't just managing the store, he was healing it, and in the process, healing himself. Helena remained his daily visitor, now more as an advisor and friend than as a customer. She would watch him interact with people, the passion for books shining in his eyes, the same passion she used to see in his mother. "Look at you," she said one day. "You're not just keeping her dream alive, you're making it bigger." And it was true. The bookstore was no longer just his mother's legacy, it was his own creation as well. As for Eduardo, the legal process ran its course. The audit revealed the extent of the fraud. Faced with irrefutable evidence, he accepted a deal to return the embezzled money in exchange for not facing criminal charges, a decision Gabriel made not out of pity, but to be able to turn the page for good. Eduardo disappeared from their lives, a pathetic figure whose greed led him to lose everything. Gabriel rarely thought of him. He was too busy building the future. One day, a young couple entered the store. They were looking for a venue for her poetry book launch. "We heard this place has a special energy," they said. Gabriel smiled. "Special energy is our main product." He offered them the space for free, asking only that they spread the word to their friends. It was the kind of decision Eduardo would have called commercial suicide. For Gabriel, it was just the magic at work. On the night of the young poet's book launch, the store was filled with a vibrant, creative energy. People of all ages squeezed between the shelves, listening intently to the verses. Gabriel, standing behind the counter, watched the scene. He didn't see customers or numbers. He saw a community, a web of stories and connections that his mother had begun to weave, and that he now had the privilege of expanding. He felt tired, but it was a good kind of tired, the exhaustion of someone who has worked for something they believe in. Helena was by his side, holding a glass of wine. "She would be dancing right now, you know," Helena said with a nostalgic smile. In the middle of all this, with a book in one hand and a glass of wine in the other, telling everyone that poetry will save the world. Gabriel laughed, imagining the scene perfectly. He no longer needed to feel sad about her absence because her essence was there, in every corner of that store. Later, when the store was almost empty, Gabriel found a small note left on the counter by the young poet. "Thank you for believing in the magic." Next to the note was a copy of her book with a dedication. "For Gabriel, who keeps the pages alive. Keep telling us stories." He held the book, feeling the weight and lightness of those words. It was more valuable than any financial report. That day, the 1-year anniversary of his mother's death, had begun with the threat of an end, the shadow of bankruptcy, of incompetence, of the definitive loss of her legacy. He remembered the fear, the feeling of drowning in red numbers. And now, at the end of the same night, he was surrounded by life, by art, by gratitude. He had not only survived, he had been reborn, along with the bookstore. He turned off the store lights, leaving just a small lamp on in the window, illuminating a stack of books. That 1 year of mourning had actually been a year of silent struggle. That specific day was not just the day he unmasked a traitor. It was the day he finally gave himself permission to take his own place in the story, not as his mother's son, but as himself, the heir not just of a property, but of a purpose. As he locked the door, he felt the cool night air. The day that began with the weight of memory ended with the lightness of a mission accomplished. The pain of loss still existed, but now it shared space with pride and hope. He looked one last time at the store's name, Living Pages, and smiled, because he finally understood. The pages weren't just the ones in the books, they were his too, and his story was just beginning.